And last week, we took a closer look at the Montana impacts of halting construction of the Keystone XL pipeline in the northeast corner of the state. Today, in the second part of our two-part series, MTN Chief Political Reporter Mike Dennison examines the impact of another environmental executive order by President Joe Biden, his moratorium on oil and gas leasing on federal lands.
Biden's order says no new leases will be issued for oil and gas production on federal lands while the Interior Department reviews the process. Critics have long said the federal government is leasing lands to petroleum producers often at below market prices and favoring oil and gas over other uses for these lands.
We have been leasing public lands for oil and gas development like candy for the last couple years. It's a really good time to take a step back, not just for climate change purposes, but also for water quality purposes.
The industry says the move will eliminate jobs and reduce revenue for states. Republican members of our congressional delegation, Representative Matt Rosendale and Senator Steve Daines, say they'll sponsor legislation to reverse Biden's order, legislation not likely to pass. But let's look more closely at the facts and the numbers behind oil and gas leasing on federal lands in Montana and elsewhere. Nationwide, about 20% of U.S. oil production is off federal land. But in Montana, there's not a single operating oil rig on these federal acres. During the Trump administration, the feds offered up 924 parcels covering 469,000 acres of public lands for oil and gas leasing in Montana and North Dakota. Only 40% of those parcels even received bids, and the total payments over 4 years was about $7 million, half of which goes to the states. In 2020, the total income on these bids was only $600,000 on 46 parcels covering 22,000 acres. A winning bid gives the company 10 years to develop oil and gas on the property. Oil companies with existing federal leases are not affected by the ban and will continue to pay royalties to state and federal governments for any production from federal lands. But as we said, right now there's no operating oil wells on federal land in Montana. Alan Olson of the Montana Petroleum Association says the lease ban could harm existing production elsewhere if that drilling on private or state lands needs to expand onto federal property.
Are we going to be able to drill even though there's federal mineral acreage in there? Are we going to have to find a way of spacing the federal minerals out and bypassing them?
But Hedges says oil companies already have thousands of leases that they're not using, and that the moratorium won't affect current production much, if at all.
This is not going to impact them, at least in Montana, because they're not producing or moving forward with developing these leases anyway. They've been hoarding these leases, but they've been getting these leases for a song, and we should not be selling public lands for a song.
Hedges Group and several others also filed suit 3 weeks ago to block federal oil and gas leases awarded in Montana and North Dakota since 2018. They say federal officials didn't properly consider the impact of continued oil development on groundwater or the climate. The Biden administration says the moratorium is a pause to examine whether the leasing program should be reformed. But environmentalists clearly hope it will lead to less oil and gas production on federal lands. In Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
You can see Mike Dennison's full reports on the impacts of halting the Keystone Pipeline and oil and gas leasing on our website, ktvh.com.